Good day, everybody. It's Andrew here, and welcome back to another update on Social Security benefits and stimulus changes. Let's talk about the increase in Social Security benefits that some Democrats are trying to get done and how this relates to Mitch McConnell. This all ties in with his views on stimulus, on inflation, and his views on Democrats approving more stimulus checks for the American people. We're going to hear directly from Mitch McConnell himself as he took the Senate floor this week. So let's discuss the details, but first, do me a quick favor, hit like, hit subscribe, share this content with anyone who you think might find this helpful, and if you really want to support my work, subscribe to my second channel. The link to that is going to be in the comments of this video. So thank you so much for your support. Now, we've talked about it for months. President Biden and Democrats have promised to increase Social Security benefits. They've promised to increase Medicare, expanding Medicare and Medicaid, and pay for all this by taxing the rich. Well, Mitch McConnell is on record as saying that he actually wants to cut all of these programs. I mean, this is back from 2018 when Trump was in charge, but back in 2017, they passed the tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. They approved $1.5 trillion in tax cuts and approved a $675 billion budget for the military. And then right after that, Mitch McConnell came out and said, to avoid going into deeper debt, we then have to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. These are the things that Mitch McConnell is saying. He says, regarding the national debt, it's disappointing, but it's not a Republican problem. It is a bipartisan problem. And this national debt grew by 17% just in 2018 when Mitch McConnell was the Senate Majority Leader. Now, since 2015, between 2015 and 2019, the deficit almost doubled just in those 3 years under Mitch McConnell as the Senate Majority Leader. But then at the same time, he says we have to cut Social Security, right? So he's okay creating trillions in dollars in tax cuts for the rich, which add to the national debt because then there's less tax revenue coming in to pay for things. He's okay with spending basically $1 trillion per year on military, but then he wants to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. This is completely unacceptable. And Mitch McConnell just took the stage a couple of days ago in the Senate, talking about how we have to spend less, we have to have less stimulus checks, we have to have less expansion of these programs like Social Security and Medicare. I mean, it's just completely tone deaf. How can this man, who approves tax cuts for billionaires in the trillions of dollars, say that we then have to pay for it by cutting Social Security benefits, by cutting Medicare? It's completely out of touch with the American people. And guys, let me know in the comments if you agree. Well, Bernie Sanders and fellow Democrats, but especially Bernie Sanders, continue to fight the good fight and try and get Social Security increased. Try and get Medicare and Medicaid expanded. Try and lower prescription drug costs across the board for seniors. Try and provide more affordable housing for seniors as well. So these battles continue to go on. They've been going on for years, and Bernie Sanders has been fighting the good fight, especially given the fact that they're both in the Senate, right? Bernie Sanders is in the Senate. Mitch McConnell is in the Senate as well. And now the stimulus package, the Build Back Better Act, is currently in the Senate. Once this Thanksgiving week is over, they're going to start debating the bill. You know, Mitch McConnell and Joe Manchin are going to try and take things out. Bernie Sanders is going to try and put things in. Bernie Sanders is going to try and include stimulus checks for seniors. That's on record. We already know that. President Biden acknowledged that as well. They will be trying to put stimulus checks for seniors in this next stimulus package, which would include Social Security, SSI, and SSDI. But then we have Mitch McConnell, who took the stage a couple of days ago, saying that we need to spend less, that Democrats are causing too much inflation by approving too much stimulus, which is completely untrue. 90% of this inflation is because of the pandemic and reopening of the economy. When you close an economy down and you reopen it all at once, demand is going to go through the roof. You're going to have 2-3 years of demand all bunched up at once. At the same time, you have supply chains which can take months or even years to get fully up and running. So obviously you end up with high demand and low supply for a short amount of time. It's not stimulus that's causing inflation. The same way that it's not Social Security that's causing the national debt. It's giving tax cuts to the rich, right? Let me know in the comments if you agree. But in any case, it's always important to hear what both sides are saying. We can't just listen to Bernie Sanders. We can't just listen to President Biden. We have to listen to Mitch McConnell as well. Because when he gives his argument, we can listen to it. We can pick it apart and say, no, Mitch McConnell, this is not true. These reasons are not true. Social Security is not adding to the national debt. Taxing the rich is adding to the national debt. You know, stimulus is not causing inflation. We have to listen to both sides so we can understand the entire argument and come back with a stronger argument ourselves. So, with that said, we're going to continue to fight for an increase in Social Security benefits, SSI and SSDI as well. And each and every single day on this channel, we're going to continue to be a voice for seniors, continue to be a voice for those who are disabled. And guys, let me know in the comments, are you with me on this? Let me know in the comments. Please comment down below. Share this video with anyone who you think will share this as well. We have to get the voice out there. But with that said, Bernie Sanders is trying to include the stimulus check for seniors in the stimulus package, and we will have a lot of updates on that to come in the next few days. But for now, let's take a look and see what Mitch McConnell had to say. Again, just so we can see both sides of the arguments and we can come back with the best argument possible. So let's take a listen, see what Mitch McConnell had to say, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.
A lot has gone wrong since this unified Democratic government took the reins back in January. Let's take a look at foreign policy. The Biden administration's clumsy retreat from Afghanistan left Americans behind who wanted out and handed the country to a government staffed with terrorists who used to be locked up at Guantanamo Bay. Let's take a look at energy independence, or should I say energy dependence. President Biden canceled our own Keystone XL pipeline, but cleared the path for a new pipeline for Vladimir Putin. The amount of Russian oil that America has to import has already nearly doubled on the Democrats' watch. Look at the border. Illegal crossings are flooding across our southern border at an all-time high. But Democrats have interior enforcement arrests down to a decade low. But there's no question that what crisis is at the top of the minds of middle-class Americans. There's no question what is keeping working Americans awake at night. It's inflation. Inflation. The runaway prices and unpredictability that Democrats' policies have fueled. 90% of Americans told one recent survey that they are somewhat or extremely concerned with inflation. We are a huge and diverse country. It's hard to get 9 in 10 Americans to agree on almost anything. But less than 1 year under Democrat policies, 90% of America is worried about inflation. And it's no wonder. Year on year, consumer prices have risen faster than they have in over 3 decades. Last month marked the 5th month in a row that inflation has topped 5%. These across-the-board numbers can sound a little abstract, so let's make it very tangible. In the past year, buying meat, fish, and eggs has gotten 12% more expensive. A gallon of gas costs the average American $1.31 more than it did a year ago. And heaven forbid anyone having to replace a family car this year, used auto prices are up 26%. Even getting family and friends together for Thanksgiving is a much pricier prospect than it was last year. Turkey alone is an extra 25 cents per pound. Factor in all the fixings, and some estimates project a feast next week will run families up to 15% more than it did last year. For a while, the White House tried to downplay the problem. President Biden and his team told American families that costs weren't really rising as much as it seemed. Or that, okay, costs were rising, but it would only last a few months. Or, as some liberals argued, that if you remove food costs, housing costs, and transportation costs from the equation, inflation really wasn't all that bad. Some have tried to argue that rampant inflation is actually a high-class problem to have because at least we aren't in a recession. I'm not kidding. I guess they think working Americans should stop complaining and be grateful things aren't even worse. But a sad irony is that inflation is exactly the opposite of a high-class problem. Inflation is likely a huge regressive tax that hits the middle class, the working class, and the poor far more than it hurts wealthy people. The 3 biggest drivers of a staggering 6.2 inflation rate we logged last month were housing, transportation, and food. These are not luxuries, they're essentials. And they take up a much bigger share of families' budgets from the middle class on down. The Democrats' inflation is functioning like an ultra-punitive tax on American families who can least afford it, exactly the opposite of a high-class problem. It didn't have to be this way. The inflation spike wasn't just predictable. It was, in fact, predicted. This past spring, I warned my Democratic colleagues right here on the floor that their unbelievably expensive and poorly targeted spending bill that masqueraded as a COVID relief would turn our strong economic recovery into an inflationary mess. Many of my Republican colleagues said the same thing. But Democrats didn't have to take our word for it. Even their own favorite liberal economists, like President Clinton's Treasury Secretary Larry Summers and President Obama's CEA Chairman Jason Furman, warned that the liberal bill might supercharge inflation. Now, our Democratic colleagues want to ram through another, even bigger, reckless taxing and spending spree that would make inflation even worse. Many of those same liberal economists support this new spending spree because of all the left-wing goodies that are packed into it. But even they largely admit, these who support this new left-wing proposal, even they admit the package would make inflation even worse next year. Stephen Ratner, a senior economic advisor to President Obama, just wrote in the New York Times that, quote, the original sin was the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. That has contributed materially to today's inflation levels. He goes on to say that Democrats' new taxing and spending spree, quote, can be deemed paid for only if one embraces budget gimmicks like assuming that some of the most important initiatives will be allowed to expire in just a few years. The result is a package that front-loads spending while tax revenues only arrive over the course of a decade. Mr. Ratner cites an outside estimate that, quote, the plan would likely add $800 billion or more to the deficit over the next 5 years, exacerbating inflationary pressures, end quote. Now this, the person I just quoted, is a former top advisor to President Obama, by definition a liberal Democrat, explaining that the Democrats' new proposal as currently constituted would make inflation worse. He says it's the Democrats' proposal itself that needs to be built back better. President Biden and his party have already brought needless pain on American families with their reckless spending. Ramming through another multi-trillion-dollar partisan wish list would only compound the damage. The hardworking men and women of this country cannot afford to be guinea pigs in a socialist experiment where Democrats try to inflate their way out of inflation.